Thank you guys so much for coming out despite the terrifying threat of like 2 inches of snow. Welcome to Craftwork, and welcome to all of these people who are just about to come in. Woo. I am Rachel Wallace, and that is Nora Rennick-Reinhardt over there. And we're the organizers of Craftwork, and we'd like to welcome you this evening. Craftwork is a series of lectures and workshops culminating in a gallery exhibit in this space that's exploring the intersection between art and craft and the relationship between those two processes and everything that falls in between. We're really grateful. We're funded by a Kickstarter campaign that many of the people in this room contributed, so this is really a community project, and the goal is to bring people together, share ideas, share the work of some really exciting artists, and also share skills. So every Craftwork event is going to include both an artist talk and a hands-on workshop, because so much of what drives our work, and probably a lot of your work, is the experience of making things with our hands. So there are flyers over by the door that have all of the upcoming Craftwork events. This is the second lecture in the series. And there's also a sign-in sheet where you can give us your info so we can keep you updated. Come on into we promise we won't bite you on the front row here. Or alternately, we could move these front row seats and make these people the unwitting front row. Surprise! So tonight's topic is identity in craft, gender, class, and race. And the intersection of art, craft, and identity was really core to Nora and my conversation coming up with this project. It's central to our work. It's central to so many of the work of artists we admire. So we were really excited to have this. We got really incredible submissions. Almost all of our submissions sort of touched on, in some way, the ways that our multiple identities affect both the way we make art and the way our art is consumed by the world at large. And we have 4 of our featured artists from the show with us tonight to talk a little bit about their work and their own process and how these questions impact their work. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Noelle Garcia, Jasmin Guerrero, Carrie Ann Schumacher, and Jeff Rhodes, who are going to present on their work, discuss a little bit, and then we're going to open it up to questions. We'll have a break at the end of it, and then if you want to stay for an awesome hands-on bead workshop by Noelle, it's going to be awesome. There are food and drinks over there. There's a bathroom over there. I think...
Do you want me to turn the lights off so that people can see the side part?
Yes.
We forgot to do that last week.
Yay! Thanks everybody for coming. So, Noelle, since you're on the end, do you want
To go first?
to go first? That seems to be your role
Sure.
in this. Oh yeah.
I don't know if that's the order. But
Be in order. It's just in the center, right?
oh, that's what happened then. Okay, cool. So I got my BFA in painting and drawing from the Art Institute of Chicago. When I first decided to go into art, it was really just this obsession I had with recreating these family portraits I had of visiting my father in prison. So these are a few of those photographs. I have quite a few of them. There was an inmate there that would take Polaroid shots for $1. And so I kind of started to notice as I got older, my dad wasn't there, I couldn't really identify his facial features. And so my idea was that by obsessively painting these, I would kind of be able to construct or figure out what his face looked like through memory or just hopefully just intense dissection. Go to the next slide. Yeah. So eventually I kind of got to this point where I figured out, I am trying to construct this person that I didn't know. And one of the most prominent things that I remember about my dad is that he was very proud of our ethnicity. We grew up on a reservation, the Paiute Reservation in northern Nevada when I was younger. I remember going to POWs and stuff as a kid, and it's all kind of stuff that's just kind of been washed away as I've gotten older and become assimilated into white girl European oil painter. And so I figured part of recreating or constructing my dad's identity would just be to identify him through brands or things that he used to wear or brands that he used to favor. And so I made these moccasins as one. He really loved his Reeboks. These are made of buckskin and rabbit fur. So we can go on to the next one. I also just started to kind of start grappling with this idea of being a painter, working with this medium that is dead, and being this part of a culture that is dead. And so I took some tools and just kind of personalized them by covering them with beads. That's pretty common practice in contemporary Native American culture. And I think it's just a way of grappling with identity. How do I define who I am? Cover it with beads. Everyone knows that your name is. So this is a palette knife and a non-functioning brush. Okay, brush. So this is a paint by number I made of an old photograph I have with my cousin, Rosemary Treetop, which is like the awesomest name ever. Wish my name was Rosemary Treetop. And there's me, a little baby in the powwow, and my cousin had won a trophy. But I do really I get really excited when I find really kitschy Indian crafts, Indian themed crafts. And I don't understand if I should be absolutely repulsed by it or absolutely in love with it, because through these objects is kind of how I construct my identity, oddly and sadly enough. And so this is an example of the workshop something that we'll be doing in the workshop. This is a piece done on a beading loom. When I figure out how to paint something, I always just kind of set it out like a paint by number cut, and I kind of started to think, hey, that's exactly how a loom is, or a loom pattern. So I figured it translated really well into it. So this piece is about 15 inches by 15 inches, and it took a year and a half. So. But we will be doing that on a much smaller scale. So yeah. And there's some shameless self-promotion. Cool.
My name is Jasmin Guerrero, and I went to Memphis College of Art for 2 years, and then
Can you speak up a little?
Yes, I can certainly try. I got my Bachelor's of Fine Art from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. I'm from Miami, Florida, and my parents are Puerto Rican and Cuban, and that will be important later on. Slide, please. The work that I'm going to be talking about tonight deals with identity under two different categories, and the first is the documentation of personal narrative, memories, things of that nature, and then the second part will be more dealing with cultural identity and trying to work out being part of this Caribbean, Latin American culture and figuring that out, and being born in America and bringing all of those things together. So this piece is called Diary, and it's inspired by embroidery samplers from the 18th century. It's using drawn work and cotton, and so I just wanted to compare the ritualistic, repetitious qualities of embroidery, stitching, and writing. Next slide, please. This one is called Album, and they're based on compositions from family photos, and they're rendered in needle lace. So it's the same idea, these very small, intimate pieces. We're documenting family history. Slide, please. And from there, I wanted to try and figure out a way to show these thoughts on a larger scale, what they might look like inside of someone's mind. So this piece is called Keeps, and that's also referring to an architectural element of a castle. It's innermost chamber where you would guard ammunitions or whatever is most important in that structure. These are handmade paper orbs that are supposed to represent thoughts in someone's mind. And the netting became very important to me, first off because it does relate to the Caribbean and to maritime culture, but also because, you can put the next slide, this piece kind of illustrates it better, that nets sort of change shape and tension based on the objects that you put inside of them. This piece is called For Later, and I liked this cobweb kind of biological quality that was coming out in these pieces. Slide, please. This piece is called Excerpt from, it's a long title, I just blanked on it. Excerpt from Excuses and Couplets, and it's a poem that I wrote a couple of years ago in college, and I used a discharge technique to recreate the drafts that I went through to make this poem, and it's about a condition that I have in my spine. And then I constructed the final version of the poem. That's the words that you see coming through. And I wanted to show this one because it does relate back to these text-based pieces, but at this larger scale. I wanted to use scale very intentionally so that these large pieces were supposed to illustrate this vast inner space, and then these smaller, really tight worked documents were the small intimate pieces. And slide. And then this is more relating to cultural identity. This is one of the early pieces that I did trying to bring together elements of Spanish heritage, Native American, specific to the Caribbean, and also Western African influences that all go into the identity of being Hispanic from that region. So this is a hammock that I made out of linen, a cotton, that cloth has this china kind of repeat motif on it, and hemp. Slide please. This piece is called Mestizaje, and I wanted to, it was inspired by medieval heraldry, and then I also incorporated this lace that traditionally was one of the textiles that was widely produced in the Caribbean, brought in as an influence from the Europeans. So I wanted to have this contrast between this very feminine, soft aspect, and then the symbol that kind of represents patriarchy and violence. And slide, please. And this is a piece that I did more recently in collaboration with Enzo Mascarella, who's in the back of the room. We both grew up in South Florida, and we took these two kind of very toxic political symbols that are very relevant to the area to try and explore the range there, and it's kind of where I'd like to move into with my work, being more specific to those issues of heritage and trying to figure that all out. And the thing, and that's my dog. And thanks a lot. He's a cutie.
It is very small.
This is where we're starting? Yay, okay. My name is Carrie Ann Schumacher. I received my BFA from Elmhurst College in digital media and my MFA from Northern Illinois University in painting, and I have no background in sculpture or fashion design. So if you had asked me about like 4 years ago if I would think that I would be here tonight for this type of work, I probably would have said no. But this just sort of came to me, and it's really hard to describe. I actually have a little bit of difficulty talking about this body of work in the sense that it's been with me for the past 3 years. I've gone through a lot of big life changes in the past 3 years, and it's kept evolving with me. So, on one hand, it talks about gender in a very universal sense, which is where this started, and then at the same time, I feel it's gotten more and more personal as I've continued working in this line. But how this started was I worked at a library, and actually on the very last day ever that I worked there, and I didn't know it was going to be my very last day ever, somebody donated a box of about 50 romance novels. And it was like just sitting there, and as a library clerk, one of the benefits was if people donated things, you could totally just take it. And I remember being like, wow, this is such a weird thing, just like so many of these, and I don't know why I need them, but I do need them, and if I don't take them, I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m. and kick myself. So I took them, and they sat in the trunk of my car for a while, but eventually I had an assignment for a class to make a piece discussing the theme of invisibility, but it was also like in/visibility. So talking about structures that have both visible and unseen parts. And for me, I guess gender was something I had thought about a lot as an undergrad, and something I somewhat stayed away from in grad school because I didn't want to be labeled a woman artist. But for that theme in particular, it was something I returned to. So the first piece I made was Harlequin. And for me, it discusses somewhat these myths that are propagated both by society and social media, and certainly romance novels, because like I had 50 romance novels, and basically it was the same plot about this girl falling in love with her bodyguard. Like all 50 of them were the same. And just if we're thin enough, and if we're pretty enough, and if we wear the right clothes, we will fall in love, and that love is going to be eternal and timeless, and the toilet's not over going to flow, and there's not going to be any bills, and it's going to be really hot and passionate all the time, forever. And that's clearly not true, but it's something we're sold. So if you, I continued discussing this, and with this dress, actually, and the next one, the one after this, this is when it turned a little more personal for me, because I began to make dresses for women in my life. This dress was made the week after my grandmother died, and it was a really difficult time in a lot of ways. I had just gotten engaged a couple months before, and obviously was expecting my grandmother to be at my wedding, and then she was dying, but she still was she was kind of losing it in a lot of ways, but she always remembered I was getting married and I was going to have a wedding. Didn't always know who I was, but I was getting married. So when she finally did pass away, I really had this very strong sense that she was still here. And that might sound really weird. It wasn't like she was a ghost, but it was just kind of this presence. So in a way, I began, well, what did her love life look like? And, it kind of took in the thought of, I'm getting married, I need to have a dress. We knew she was dying, she knew she was dying. If you were going to die and you knew the day you were going to die, what would you wear? And also, if you are going into the next life, what would you wear into the next life? So it's at this point that it starts to get more personal narratives. So I don't know if you just want to kind of, it just became about the people in my life. Sometimes it's funny. Is it the one after? Sorry, I feel really lost slide-wise. This one, for instance, obviously working in romance novels, I've met a number of romance novel authors through this, and either they really hate me, because clearly I'm cutting up their work, or they're really supportive. And Miss Priestley, actually, Samantha Priestley, lives in London, and I don't know how she found me and I found her, but she's always extremely supportive. And it kills me because she belongs to this online dating website, and she gets all of these like crazy emails all the time, and she just posts them on Facebook. So I kind of took that idea and I cleaned it up a little bit, like letters from secret admirers. But it's become a really interesting way. It's both a tribute and a critique in a way, because I get to talk about the women who haven't inspired me in my life, but at the same time, I'm very aware of what's underneath it all and what it's really saying. The back was so cool. The back was way better than the front. So sorry. Yay!
All right. So my name is Jeff Rhodes, and I make work in fiber. Next slide. This piece is it's a needle felted piece. It's called Block 3 after M. Barney with wood grain. And needle felting, for those who know, is like you take a little barbed needle and wool fiber, and you poke and poke and poke for hours and hours and hours. It's a really laborious process, but you have a lot of control over what you wind up with. So like I was saying, I make work in fiber, but I still consider myself a painter. I come from a painting background. I have a BFA in painting from the University of Illinois. To the next slide. And so when people find out that I make work, and they ask me what type of work I make, even though I mostly work in fiber now, I still say I'm a painter. Even though most of the paintings I still make fall into one of two categories. There's this work, and the piece on your left is called Study for Jacob's Ladder Quilt after M. Barney, and the piece on the right is called Study for Block 3 after M. Barney. So this work, or they're both studies for pieces that will eventually be made in fiber, and they're both gouache on paper. The next slide. And then the paintings I still make fall into another category, which is work that explores the issues brought up by the fiber pieces in sort of a tangential way. And so this is a series that I've started. These are pages from the room and board catalog that I copied to the exact scale in gouache on paper. And they to me, they talk about both domesticity as well as how we think about originality in work. So next slide. So like I said, I now make work in fiber, and this is another one of my needle felted pieces. This one is called Log Cabin Block after J. Coons. And you'll see there's a pattern that I'm playing around with the language of quilt making. I think it's really interesting in how ideas are disseminated in quilt culture, and how the systems of production differ from that of the fine art world. And I think it allows us a commentary on the fine art world by exploring this other culture and how it functions. But I don't actually make quilts, I just play with the language. So if you go to the next slide, this is the closest I get to quilts, and these aren't quilts, this is actually a technique that I learned on YouTube after reading an article in a Martha Stewart magazine on how to make chenilled baby blankets. And the piece on the left is called, again, After M. Barney with cross block, and the piece on the right is called Over the Edge with Evening Star Block. And I find the reason I tried making quilts when I first got interested in it, I made a few, and when I wasn't very good at it, and I couldn't figure out how to take that process and turn it into what I considered artwork related to the ideas I was interested in. But I feel like when I'm one step removed from that process, like this work is, that it's a little easier to deal with the issues that I'm interested in, and the issues around quilting. Next slide. So this is another one of part of that series. This is called Bedding Experts Building with Block 3 after M. Barney. And so I guess one of the questions I wanted to answer was why I chose to work in fiber. And there's a lot of paths that led me to this. I think the thing that's most pertinent to the discussion tonight is the circumstances I find myself in. So I stopped making work for about 15 years and was working in the art world, on the other side of the art world, and I stopped working about 4 years ago, And so now I find myself in a place where I don't have this dedicated studio space. I don't have dedicated studio time. So I make work in my home, most of the time on my couch or at my dining room table. And so it's a very domestic setting. So it makes sense that I'm using a domestic process, both logistically as well as conceptually. And then I'll leave you with the last slide, which is another one in the series, and it's creatively entitled You Know, You Know.
Thank you guys for sharing your work with us tonight. And I feel like we've started to touch on some of the questions that we wanted to touch on tonight, but I have some questions here. We also want to open up to discussion from the audience in a little bit as well. But I thought maybe we could kick things off. You've talked a little bit about how these questions of identity, of race and class and personal history and gender have influenced your own process, but how do you think they've influenced the way you've been received, either by the gallery world or in academia, and the way your work is perceived by others?
Are we starting with me?
Yeah,
Direct eye contact. Okay. I guess when I originally decided to start picking up fiber materials, it was out of just necessity. I had just had a baby, and so the easiest way to make art, you couldn't be working on a giant canvas while dealing with a newborn, was just to, I could hang out and make sure the baby was fine and bead stuff, and it was just comfortable, right, because I already knew how to do it traditionally, and so it seemed like a no-brainer. But oddly, I guess not oddly enough, but in academia, for me, it's actually been really well embraced, and I get more notoriety and more write-ups on my work in fiber and materials, which I'm sure has a lot to do with my ethnicity, and I'm Indians, Native Americans in the fine art world are a little bit more of a rarity than a painter in the fine art world, and I'm not entirely upset about that, or it's just kind of something I accept and move along with. One thing I have noticed that was kind of weird is how I just kind of started getting grouped into feminist shows all of a sudden. And I never really thought of my work as any sort of, having any sort of feminist directive or anything. And I remember I was kidding about it with one of my advisors in grad school, and she's like, "Are you kidding me? You, sew everything." And I'm like, "I'm talking about prison, and there's, beer bottle caps in my stuff." And I don't see how that is feminine, but, I guess naturally fiber and materials end up being that way, and I guess my work has sort of a sentimental nature that just I'm going to get wrapped up in it whether I want to or not, and I should just be comfortable with it.
Do you find yourself getting offended? Sometimes I feel like I should automatically be included in women's art shows, so when I do get a rejection from a women's art, I'm like, what is it? I get so, what?
I don't actually seek them out. They just kind of happen.
They follow.
When I step back and look at my work, like a stapler covered with beads or a paintbrush covered in beads, I don't look at that and think, dude, a woman totally made that. So I don't understand, I don't always understand it, but whatever.
I'm going to say I've actually had this relatively same experience for both in academia and I guess the fine art world. It's been encouraged or embraced more. My craft-based work definitely gets far more attention than anything else I've ever made. So I've never seen it as a barrier.
I feel like my experience hasn't been totally the opposite, but when I was considering this question of working in craft techniques within the fine art world, I had this flashback to being in junior high and playing soccer, and inevitably playing soccer with boys, and it was like being the one girl playing on the boys' team. Every time you step onto the field, you have something to prove. So I felt that way also working with craft, consult my notes. But I felt like kind of being boxed into a craft artist or even a woman artist, it kind of suggested that there'll always be a special interest for that work, but it's like the real conversation or it's just happening elsewhere. And then within those confines, it's very embraced. That's been my experience, at least.
And I'm not sure I've ever thought of my work as gendered. I feel like I kind of, well, when I was still in academia many years ago, when I was getting my degree, I was a painter, and so I wasn't doing this type of work. And then, I don't know, I guess I have that obnoxious attitude that a painter gets. We're kind of post-disciplinary, where I can sort of work in whatever discipline I want, and it doesn't necessarily have to be one gender or another. I'm not sure.
But then you get asked to do things like this because you were the man who works in fibers.
Which I mean, is a good thing.
I think for some of you, it's clear the way questions of identity play out in the subject matter of your work, but I think it's also really interesting the way it plays out in your choice of technique. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, how your thoughts about your own personal history, your gender history, or your ethnic history influences the way you interact with the techniques you do and why you chose to use them.
Well, I for a long time, actually, I had really shied away from any sort of Native American themed crafts because I was just absolutely repulsed by them, which I know is kind of an awful thing to say. But I identified like turquoise and sparkly beads as being, I just associated them with being part of an ugly past, of dealing with alcoholism and prison and not being the things that I ever wanted to be. I wanted to paint and figures, and I wanted to make beautiful things. But then, it just kind of came around out of necessity. Just I wanted to make art, and this was the way to do it. It was portable. It was affordable. And I can do it while still performing domestic duties. And then it just kind of like fell into place. I just kind of understood that's what I was talking about all along anyways in the paintings. So just kind of kept rolling with it. I did start to get a little concerned with, because I'm a half-breed. I'm not obviously brown. I started to get concerned about authenticity, or being questioned about my authenticity. And then, I don't know if everyone knows, but when you're Native American, in order to get any benefits through scholarships, anything, you have to have a certificate of blood to prove that your lineage through your tribe, right? And so no matter what anyone said, I'm authentic. No matter if I teach you how to bead on a loom wrong, you were authentically taught by a real live Native American how to bead on a loom. So I'm kind of privileged in that sense, because I have that. So, yeah.
Jasmin, do you have anything to?
Yes. So the three major ethnic groups that were involved in the colonization of the Caribbean and Latin America were mainly the Spaniards, the natives from that region, and then West Africans. So when I'm thinking about techniques and materials, I try to kind of contrast a technique that comes from one versus materials that come from another to relate to culture and to location in that way. And I'm trying to do that more and more as the work goes on. I was also kind of like put off by anything having to do with Latin America, Hispanic, sort of that aesthetic, I think, because I grew up around it, and there was nothing special about it to me until I left South Florida, and I didn't see it around, and kind of made me appreciate it more. So yeah, I'm still trying to like work it out, and it's a new direction that I'm going into, so I'm figuring it out, but
Carrie and Jeff, I don't know if you have anything to talk about your techniques. I mean, like with Jeff, I don't know if there's a tradition of quilting or of fiber arts in your own family, if this is the kind of thing that you saw. No, I'm serious. A lot of us learned this stuff from our mothers and our grandmothers.
You know, I hadn't actually thought about this in a while, but until we actually started to think about, when I really sat down and think about why am I working in fiber now, and there was a loom in my living room as a kid. My mom wove very amateur. You know, she wove like scarves and book covers for us on the loom, and she was always doing like latch hook rugs. Like I went out and dug out a latch hook rug I had made as like a 7-year-old that I still have, and so that was always with me. But I never thought much of it, and actually until I started to sit down and think about the answers to these questions. And I'm not sure that I mean, I guess maybe there was something that was planted in me that it was okay to do this stuff because I did it as a kid. But I never thought of that sort of like history as that's why I'm doing it until this discussion.
And I guess my last question before we turn it open, and I know, Noelle, you touched on this a little bit, but I always wonder, I think when craft is tied so much to identity, what does it mean to work in a craft tradition outside of your identity as well? And are there questions, as you touched on, of authenticity or of appropriation? And I don't know if you want to talk about this in relation to your own work or just things you've seen or thought about at all.
One of the things that I value in being an artist, or I think that is a very important part of being an artist, is being able to pinpoint the most effective technique to get your statement across. You know, you might be saying one thing, you know, about the female figure in art, you know, oil painting is going to be the best method to say that, not, you know, necessarily a weaving. I'm all about appropriating what you need to, because, you know, my goal is to say this, and I want it to be clear and understood. So, I mean, along the way, I started picking up Mexican beading techniques. Well, I'm like, whatever, it's related, you know, last name's Garcia, whatever. So, Mexican beading technique, you use wax to apply beads to things. And I didn't really think much of it. I just thought, it works best for this project, and that's, you know, game plan completely thought out. But I got teamed up with a Native American author named Neela Northson, and she had to write a poem, and I had to make a piece of artwork, and I applied beads with wax, and she came up to me during the exhibit, and she was like, "You know how to do it the right way, didn't you?" But like, which is Native American beading, right? So usually the people that I get most questioned by are Native American. It's just part of like this the internal culture that you have to constantly be proving your nativeness. But outside of that, I never get questioned about appropriating this and that.
How do you feel when you see other people using Native American beading who aren't, like, say?
I am not enormously, I don't think I have a definitive stance on it. You know, like, sometimes I enjoy kitschy things. Sometimes I find it a little funny, and it says like a message, and I'll, you know, that makes sense. Like I don't remember the artist, but there's this really great headdress piece made out of like a washer machine, done by a white guy. I don't care. It's freaking amazing. It's like this really awesome headdress, and it was freaking made out of sharp washer machine. I'm excited about it. There are times when I do get a little uncomfortable, but it's just really gray area, I think. I think it actually has to do with maybe what defines it more, if it's upsetting, is the research that's done behind it. Like, say, for example, the Seahawks logo. There's a lot of issues going around about Native Americans and logos, right? So the Cleveland Indians logo is offensive because he's like this really upsetting caricature, right? But then the Seahawks logo is like well researched and designed around actual coastal Salish like art. So like if I see a piece of Native American stuff appropriated into an artwork and I can see, yes, this person did their research, I'm usually pretty comfortable with it. But if it just like glosses over, like how a lot of times you see it in fashion, like Urban Outfitters got in trouble like last year for designing it a collection and calling it the Navajo collection. And legally, you're not allowed to do that because in the 1970s, the U.S. government brought about the Native American Arts and Crafts Act, where you cannot sell any sort of artwork and define it as Native American unless you have that legit certificate of authenticity. So, that is my complicated long
So we
answer
can't
to
take
that.
our skills we learned tonight.
You can take it, but you can't say that it's not Native American. Like, yeah. You could say maybe using Native American techniques.
All right.
It is just very precise wording.
Is there a percentage in the authenticity that you have to be?
Each tribe varies because each tribe is a separate sovereignty, separate nation. So, like, tribes that were assimilated earlier during colonization, like the Cherokee, they have usually a really small percentage, like a 32nd or like 16th or something like that. But for the majority, a lot of them is a quarter.
I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in on that before I open it up to audience questions. The floor is open. And also feel free to, if you guys have questions that you wanted to ask as well. Go for it.
Do you each identify yourselves as a full-time artist?
And the question for was whether they identify full-time as an artist. Why don't we start on this end to save Noelle?
Sure.
I know.
No, I don't. I guess I identify myself now as a stay-at-home dad at this point who happens to make work when I have time. I think it's a troubling word because anybody can call themselves an artist, right? So I usually say I make work instead of I'm an artist.
I would say I probably have more time than most people to make art, and I definitely try to take advantage of that. But at the same, I don't want to say it's a stigma, but it's like if you say, what do you do? And I say, I'm an artist, you're going to be like, how do you eat food? How do you pay for the food? And I'd say, well, so, I mean, yeah, but it's always kind of like, I don't want to say like, oh, but there are, I don't know, I do a lot of things to pay the bills. And art is part of that.
Yeah, I don't either. I do collaborative works. I've done commission stuff. I've done like some artist studio work, and then graphic design also is mainly what I do. But it is an important part that I would like to spend more time on in the future.
I look at myself as just being an artist who is constantly working to feed my addiction. And hopefully most of the time it ends up being art related, like in graphic design, even though it's still a bit removed from, my personal creative intent. But I'm fortunate enough to, snag teaching things and illustrations along the way, which are still enjoyable. But, yeah.
How do you see each other's work related? As you're all sitting here answering questions, talking about different things, how do you see the flow of your work having a conversation, or do you see it having a conversation at all?
Did everybody hear that? Yes?
Well, I can relate with a lot of what you've been bringing up about cultural identity and using different techniques to bring that across.
Speak up, please.
Yeah, that I can relate to the way that she's bringing up issues of culture and identity through trying to define that with different techniques and imageries. And, yeah.
I think maybe not even just identity in general, which obviously it's kind of in the title of this panel. But yeah, just, I mean, we all have some sort of personal narrative playing out.
Nope. Forced you out here.
So I guess I had a question for you guys in the middle, because you both worked sort of with lace, or sort of referring to lace as a, and you actually were using like actual lace making techniques like the needle lace and bobbin lace. Were you working in bobbin lace too?
I have done it. Yeah, the picture in the beginning was a bobbin lace.
Which I thought was pretty interesting, just because lace is sort of, it's a medium that's actually wrote my undergraduate thesis about lace, so it's something but it's sort of a medium that doesn't convey information. It sort of often kind of signifies like this sort of big idea of like femininity without really, it doesn't depict anything, and it kind of can't be used to, you can't like draw a picture with it really, because it's sort of white and holes and isn't even like embroidery where you can, make a picture of Castro's face or whatever. It's sort of it is a sort of non-communicating medium in that way, and I was sort of interested in the way that you guys are both using that sort of reference to femininity, and whether there's sort of more to that than just sort of it standing in for that idea.
There is an artist, I wish I could remember her name, but she did a series of laced, kind of crochet lace pieces that were enlarged. I think they were viruses or something like that. And those were really great. The way that I was drawn to lace, I just really wanted to learn how to make it. I like that it's this permeable, like you see through it, it's very scant. And then it also related to netting, I felt like. And then netting is sort of this masculine textile. It's one of those few textiles that are designated to men. So I like seeing them together and kind of comparing those, I think. Yeah.
I really like your description of lace as white and full of holes. That's, I don't know. Yeah. I think my challenge is more so in trying to get paper to act as fabric and taking something that traditionally just kind of lays flat and not really activating any space and turning it into a plane and giving it texture. And I think, I don't know if obviously it references lace, but maybe the generic quality that it doesn't have this really specific association to anything in particular works well, because it does leave it open to a universality.
Guys, can you talk a little bit about your process? How the piece?
Mine?
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Well, I don't know. It just does. It is kind of insane and intense sometimes, and other times it's not. I start with the dress form. I make a paper understructure of sorts. I glue book pages together to make panels, and I wrap it so it takes the form of a female figure. I use a whole lot of duct tape, because I found if you don't on that big dress, actually when we were transporting it, the skirt ripped away from the bodice because I didn't have that flexibility in the understructure at the time. And then I slid it up the side, so actually all of the dresses can come off the form, and if you really were so brave, and I think they're like a size 0, you could wear one. But everything is glued on to the form, like the understructure then. So I cut individual pages. It's a lot of hole punch. That's why it was like, talk about your technique. I was like, well, I have a lot of scrapbooking scissors, and I got a hot glue gun. I got some hole punch. I'm like, God, am I like the soccer mom at like Michael's? I don't know. And sometimes that is a question I have, where I'm like, how legit is this? When it's like, what do you do? It's just hot glue stuff to stuff. It's not that hard. But it is just kind of, I don't think of myself as a very patient person, but it is just a it's a lot of cutting and gluing and just having the patience to make like 1,000 sheets of something and then glue them on one by one.
The most important question is, where do you keep all of that?
In my basement, which is terrifying. To just look down there and see like this army of really fragile. Yeah, it's like, oh my god. I mean, that was hard when I graduated from grad school. That was kind of the question. Was I want to continue in this line of work, but how can I? Because I'm living in an apartment right now, and luckily, my husband and I were able to move into. My grandpa's renting us his house, and thank God he has a basement. But that's also my fear is one day am I just going to be like the crazy lady. Instead of cats, I just have like a pile of paper dresses. I hope nobody ever looks down there through like the windows. It's probably just terrifying. No.
Curious if you have thought about all of the pieces that you showed me were female figures. If you thought about monster cover,
Making
doing any creations of the male characters in the novels, and I'm sure have like a very very big part in the novels as well.
I'm just
and that relate to having like
Huh.
almost figure or settings of figures interacting with each other.
And just to repeat that back, sorry, you're quiet.
Oh, sorry.
Whether or not she had considered doing male figures, since that's a big part of the romance novels as well.
Or I guess just figures interacting with each other. You know, I haven't read romance novels, but I imagine that women have other female counterparts that are friendships, and maybe like friendships that are very love friendships with other women as strong counterparts. If you thought about.
I've read because the first one I did, I wanted all the sex scenes for the shoulder. Like I wanted this peacock mating call, right? So I didn't like read it word for word, but I don't know. Like I read 50 Shades of Grey, and the only reason I read it is because somebody was like, this is like the romance novel of our time, right? This is definitive. It's not. But it's you know they're making the movie and what, so I was like, that might not be a bad idea, and I was like, I should probably really read this first. And I don't like, sometimes I think it's some like obviously all the dresses are just kind of on headless women. And I don't know if you've read this book, but I don't know there's 3 books about this girl and I don't know anything about her. Like she's the main character in all of them and I have she has brown hair. That's pretty much like the only description. Like I don't, like it's almost like so blank so you can put yourself in. It is like the males are going to have a stronger point because you as the female want to put yourself into that sort of first person. Because I mean, who doesn't? Well, some people don't have brown hair, but like any of us could have been Anna in that book. Don't read it. It took me like most of October to get through all 3, and it was like I'd be like, oh, I guess it's time for me to sit down and read like 50 Shades of Grey some more. And I like reading, so for me to say that, it was a struggle. But people get angry. I've had so many authors who are like, well, if you actually like read our work, maybe you'd know it. And I'm like, I don't want to offend. I'm not offending you. Sorry.
There is also interesting. Oh, sorry. I got really excited about what you were saying. I'm interested about people that are the authors that you said that were offended by your work.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to know how, if you have any idea, like how, like, do they think that because you're taking apart the physical object of the book, but you're making another thing that's like
There's
sort of lovely in its own respect? So, like, I'm curious about how the authors get upset.
There's somewhat 2 camps, and there is a sect that's books are very sacred objects, and I'm like these are like a quarter at the thrift store. Like I'm sorry, I'm not ripping up like first editions of Shakespeare here, folks. Like let's all calm down. But I do have people that get upset that this is such a waste of literature. And then I have, because part of my, is I don't want to say, like, if you enjoy romance novels as an escape, if that's something you like, I don't, go for it. I don't care. But I think the problem starts to come, like, if you think this is how relationships should be. Because it takes place in such a small, I mean, on, like, 50 Shades of Grey, I think, like, all 3 books took place in, like, a month, and by the end, sorry if you were going to read it, but by the end of the, by the end of, maybe it's a little bit more, because I think they went on, like, a 3-week honeymoon, of course, because he's rich. But, like, I mean, it was a really short amount of time span, and, like, you know, they met, they, like, dated for a couple weeks, she got married, and then she was pregnant, and, like, there was, like, a crazy, like, bank robbery heist thing. Like, there's all this stuff, and it's, like, that's not my life. Like, I haven't been married that long, but I've been, you know, we've been dating since 2006. Like, that's not romance. Or I guess maybe, like, romance, but it's not, like, a real relationship. And I think if people start thinking, like, that's what it should be. Like, it should be all-consuming. It should be super hot and super passionate. And I feel that's somewhat a myth that these books perpetuate. And it's not just these books. It's other things. It's magazines. It's the media. And I feel that's something wrong with it. Not that you necessarily want to read about, like, the toilet overflowing, but, you know, that's part of life. And I think they get offended when, I'm not saying the books are useless, but I'm saying some of the myths that they put out there are useless, and that's when people get upset, like, oh, romance. I had somebody who was like, they're totally, most of them are rooted in reality, and I was like, okay.
So I think if there are no more burning questions, we're gonna take like a 10-minute break. People can munch on snacks and get some drinks, and then we're going to reconvene for our amazing authentic bead weeding workshop from Noelle. But before we do that, I really want to give a round of applause to our amazing artists for sharing their work, but also so much of their lives in this process, because that is a lot of what we're talking about. You'll be able to see these works in person in this gallery. The show opens on April 12th, and I'm really excited to see them. So definitely come back for it. Have some snacks, make some beads.
Are there more workshops coming up?
There are more workshops coming up. That's a great question. There's a complete list of workshops on flyers, which you can feel free to take over on the table next to our sign-in sheet. Our next workshop is in 2 weeks on...
It's the continuing conversations, past, present, and future of the art versus craft debate. We're going to focus on 3 moments in the past whenever that conversation has changed. So it's not the whole history, but we're going to focus on 3 moments in time, and then we're going to have a conversation about where we would like to see the conversation going in the future. And then the workshop will be by Cutie Marie Stitt, and it's going to be sort of a thought workshop on systems of value, so use value, sign value, and exchange value. So it's going to be really great.
It's, you know, about why some quilts are...
Why some quilts are art,
why some quilts are art, and why some quilts are not art. Thank you guys so much. Yay!